and welcome to the Keys to Therapy. Today's episode, we have Stacy as the guest. So, hi, Stacy.
Hi guys.
So, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I am Stacy. I started, oh my goodness. Um, so I'm active duty. I'm active duty Coast Guard, and I decided while I was active duty to go to grad school and become a therapist. So I am now a licensed therapist in North Carolina, Florida, Alabama, and Colorado. And so I do only telehealth because we move around so much. So it's been hard. When I retire from the Coast Guard, I will have my own office and transfer or transition into seeing people in person again. But right now this works for me, and thankfully COVID has helped it
Take
be
off.
more telehealth friendly. So that's been great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So also I have three boys, 11, 8, and 6. He just turned 6 last week.
Aw.
And my husband and I have been married for 15 years. I think this year will be 16 years. Who's counting after that long? but he's wonderful, super supportive. I would not be here. I wouldn't have been able to accomplish everything that I've accomplished if he, weren't as supportive as he is. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. I just love your story because it's so unique compared to a
Yes.
lot of other people's. And so I'm excited to dive in, and some of this stuff I'm sure I'll learn for the first time too, which is exciting. So,
Yeah. I'm
yay.
excited to share.
Yay. Well, tell me a little bit about what made you decide that you wanted to be a therapist.
Okay. Goodness, this is it gets a little personal. So like my childhood wasn't the best. My father and I didn't really have a relationship growing up, and my mom worked a lot. So it was basically me and my brother, and we had lots of family around, but I don't know. It just wasn't like a great family dynamic. There was a lot of verbal, physical abuse, that kind of stuff going on in our family dynamic. So I was always this child who kind of just was like, hey, here I am, wanting to be noticed, and then also not wanting to fall into the same routine. Like I knew that very young that I didn't want to do that. And so I've always been very curious about like why I had that in me. Just because it's not very common. Like a lot of times you'll just see the same cycles over and over.
Yeah.
So it really did give me a passion to work with children, especially. I started college right out of high school I wanted to be a probation officer. And then like as I was in college, I was searching for jobs because I knew I wanted to like move out of my hometown, just because it wasn't healthy for me. I was dating a guy who was so much older than me. It was kind of just like I was in the routine, but knew I didn't want to be in the routine kind of
Mhm.
thing. So started college, went to college, started applying for jobs, and like couldn't get anything. And I was like, what is going on? And what I found was a lot of like probation or like law enforcement kind of jobs that I wanted to go into because I was studying criminal justice,
Mm.
wanted experience. And so one day I was actually working at Nextel. Do you remember Nextel? Like the
Yeah.
walkie-talkie cell phone?
Yeah,
I
my
was,
stepdad had it.
yeah. So I was working at Nextel, and I was like Googling like law enforcement jobs or, something to kind of get my foot in the door, and the Coast Guard popped up. And so
Mhm.
I joined the Coast Guard, that transitioned into me joining the Coast Guard. And then while I was going through the Coast Guard, I did a lot of volunteer events with kids. So they have like partners in
Mhm.
education for kids. I did CASA, like a court appointed special advocate for kids.
Mhm.
And I did Big Brothers Big Sisters. And I
Mm.
was like, this is really something that I want to go into. Like, hey, the Coast Guard's cool and all, like I'm happy to serve and do this, but this is my passion. So it's always been like an on the side kind of passion to work with kids. And I ended up getting my bachelor's in psychology. And then it was just God just kind of showed up for me one day and was like, hey, there's this. I don't know if it was like a pop-up on my phone or something that was like, get your degree in social work or in clinical mental health counseling. And so I started researching, and
Mm.
um, And then I went to Colorado Christian University and got my graduate degree in clinical mental health counseling through there, and then started working with kids. And so it was like, I knew that that passion was being filled. And it felt really good. It felt like that's where I was meant to be. And I've, even in my job in the Coast Guard, I'm a yeoman. So it's a job that's like helping people. It's customer service, and it's,
Admin and different.
yeah. So you're always helping people. People are coming to you with their problems. So it's always just been like engraved in me. But like, this is where I'm meant to be. So I'm just happy to be here. And I don't work with kids right now. They do still have a very soft heart spot, or a big spot in my heart, but it's just too hard with telehealth. So
Yeah.
I've transitioned into like older teens and adults, but I plan to transition back into working with some kids. I can't have a full caseload of kids because it's a lot.
It's a whole lot. I keep aging up every time I work somewhere new. I'm like, 10 and up. Let's do 13 and up. Let's do 16 and up.
Yeah, it is.
But
It's definitely a lot more. But I feel so bad because I hear all these parents saying like, I can't find therapy for my kids,
yeah.
And I think it's because you can't do a full caseload of kids. It's just too much.
It is a lot. But like you said too, there are barriers with virtual, because the younger they are, the harder it is to engage them for in 45 minutes even, let alone an hour. So,
Right.
and privacy, I know some of them like had issues. I remember when COVID first hit, I had like a 14, 15-year-old who I was like, where are you? She's like, in my closet. Because she wanted to make
Oh,
sure it was
no.
private. And I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, put a sound machine on, like a fan, you'll be good. But like, some kids just don't really take to it, or if you're doing play therapy, or you need some different like resources or stuff like that,
Right.
it gets tougher. So I think it makes sense that in some ways it's probably helping your career that you're dealing with more of like the parents and the older ones, because then you're going to have like all of the, here's where it can go, or here's how these things manifest. So when you go back and you're working with kids, you're going to know all the building blocks that lead
Right.
to these other issues and be able to help them fix that, sort through it, whatever else younger. So,
That's true. Yeah. There's always been like, for me, kids and then military are truly my passion. And I think it's because that younger me, like that small little
yeah.
Stacy, was like, I wish I had somebody. Like, I wish I had someone I could have connected with, or that would have heard me. And so I do think that pulls me up, towards the kids a lot more.
Oh yeah. And then being a parent yourself too, you've got like the hands-on personal experience at your house. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
like, gosh, when you combine that then with all of the other knowledge, those kids in Florida are very lucky. Like, they're going to be good.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your grad school experience then, because it sounds like it was different than maybe what is like the
Yes.
traditional.
Right. So, I mean, for me, it probably wasn't different because that's all I knew.
Yeah.
But yes, very much so. I actually struggled quite a bit through grad school. I struggled even as a child, like with always feeling like things were always harder for me. And then, of course, I join and I apply for grad school while I'm active duty. Like, duh, it's going to be harder for you, right? Like, but I always kind of felt like, gosh, what would the word be? Like I had to pretend because like the Coast Guard was my career. Like that's what
Yeah.
I was doing and that's what I was into. And my passion was something different. So it was like, I always felt like there was two sides of me. But I've been able to overcome that. And that was part of grad school. Is like, I really learned a lot about myself and I grew so much. My marriage got better. My mothering got better. Even though it was very demanding. I really took everything from grad school and like applied it to myself. And I think most grad school programs, maybe I don't really know the details of CAC-REP, but I believe that they all require like some sort of individual counseling, or it might have just been my school. But they did require that we go to our own counseling. And gosh, I loved that. I loved that they made us do that just because it helped me grow. And then it also like helped me learn, what a therapist does and to kind of engage in their techniques. The hardest part for me, so I went online, so I was online grad school. During the summer, we had to be in seat for at least 5 days. So every summer for 3 years, we would go to Colorado.
Wow.
I think my husband went with me twice and I went once, by myself. In the, yeah, my last year, I actually had my 6 week, my youngest was 6 weeks old. So
Oh
he
my
came
God.
along too. And they were super great. Like they let me nurse him, like my husband could bring him up there and I could nurse him. So they were super
Wow.
flexible. But so we went in seat for 5 days during the summer. And then my last year was time for me to go into practicum and internship. And I had had my baby and well, actually, let me back up for a second. So one of the girls that I met in grad school, we became really good friends. It was very interesting because we'll both tell you that we didn't expect to be each other's friend. We were just very different, but we sat at the same table and we were at the same hotel. And this was the first year that I went. So it was just me that year.
Mm.
And so we connected and our stories were very similar. We had a lot of the same history and background. So we became really good friends. And then our second summer when we were in seat, she had just found out she was pregnant. And so she was like really kind of battling, like, do I stay in the program or not? And we were in a cohort. So you stay
Mm.
in the same
Yeah.
same group the whole program. So if you drop out, like you can take some classes, but you have to wait to take core classes until the next summer.
Mm.
Um, so, she was really battling whether or not to stay in. And then it was like 3 weeks after we had come back from our second summer in seat, I found out that I was pregnant. So we both became pregnant kind of around the same time. We both have 6-year-olds and I think we leaned on each other quite a bit through that because we both didn't want to back out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's really hard for me to quit something that I start. So even though it would just been pausing, I was like very fearful of like not picking back up. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I'm just going to do it and get it over with and get it done. So we were really each other's support through that period. And then the third summer, I'd gone to Colorado with my newborn and my husband, and then we were moving because we were transferring in the Coast Guard, and I had to find an intern practicum site. We moved in June, and I had to have a practicum site by August, and it was very hard for I put my application out there to so many places and no one would give me an online interview. This was pre-COVID. So no one, like, online interviews were not a thing. Like they
Mm-hmm.
didn't do them or it was very rare. But I like basically forced myself into this place. I think I emailed them like, oh my God, so many times and was like, hey, can I please intern at your place? And like I should have known the place was a mess.
Mm-hmm.
I am very thankful for working there. It was in-home therapy place.
Ah.
But like they were just not very organized. And I should have known because like they weren't getting back to me very timely. But I think because I inserted myself so much, they were finally just like, yeah, you have the job.
We're tired of you emailing us, whatever. Just come
Yeah.
work here.
And they were transitioning from like their old director to a new director. And
Mm.
actually, it was right when I got hired. She got hired. I believe we got hired around the same time, but her husband was retired Coast Guard. So that was
Oh,
really nice. And we're still like great friends to this day. So she supervised me through my in-home practicum and internship. I did it both at the same place.
wow.
Um, and so that was the most difficult part, like going to school, doing my Coast Guard, having 3 kids,
Oh.
and having to do practicum and internship, and get those hours done. Thankfully, in home, I mean, God was planning it all out for me because most of the time in home is evening hours.
Mm-hmm.
So, like it gave me that flexibility to do my job at the Coast Guard during the day and then go and do in-home therapy with, 3 to 4 families a week. And I learned a lot through in-home therapy. It was very taxing, very stressful, many like underprivileged families and children. gosh, like so heartbreaking, but also like my case notes, my treatment plans, the way I work with people and families developed so much through that experience. I would not trade it for the world. It was just very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, something you can't really stay in long term.
Right. No, it is so hard. Like, and you get paid nothing. Like
Mhm.
it's wonderful to learn, to dig your feet in, get some experience in, but yeah, if you're doing in-home, or if you plan on doing in-home, please take care of yourself, because like self-care, they preach that in grad school, but it's so important.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I feel like community mental health in home, a lot of the jobs you have in the beginning of your career, it's almost kind of like boot camp, right? Before you go in
Yeah.
the military. Like you were in the trenches, you were working harder than you probably ever will. It's like physically, mentally demanding. And then once you're done, you can kind of settle in a little bit more into
Yeah.
what you're going to do next. But in the beginning, it's a lot.
Right. And you feel like, I mean, when you said that, I can remember, like, I feel it in my body. I'm a therapist that works with a lot of body sensations. So, so
Yeah.
this is why I'm talking about it.
Where do you feel
Um,
it in your body?
yeah. But like, as you were saying that, I just felt kind of like unsettled, like not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like a trend kind of in-home or community care, is like you just don't ever feel like you have it. Like, I don't know if it's
Mm-hmm.
just because I was so new and I didn't really have a whole lot of experience, but I felt like I could be doing so much better for these families, but I didn't really know, or didn't have the experience to know. Um, and I'm sure I did great. I'm sure I was fine.
Yeah.
But just thinking of that, and like I'm remembering how that felt, and it just did not feel good. Like, and now, you kind of come in, and now I transitioned from in-home to group to private practice. But now I feel settled. I feel like I
Mhm.
have that now, like kind of what you were just saying.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think in the beginning it's almost like imprinted on us, like that imposter syndrome and that fear and oh my God, this family's already having a hard time, like, and I'm the solution. And it's just like, why, who's letting me do this? Like there's a lot of self-doubt. And I think that kind of like imprints on us. So when we think of those spaces, it immediately puts us back in our own headspace because it's almost never the clients that are the issue. It's either like the agency or the funding or their insurance or lack thereof or resources. So it's
Yeah,
almost always like the systems that they're in. And we feel very powerless because we're
right.
trying to help them within a system that is not trying to help them. So that just like, I guess, doubles down on our imposter syndrome. And then we just feel lost like overall. And I think that's why
Right.
burnout's so high in those settings.
Right. Yeah. But I will say, like, I mean, I still remember some of those families just like
Mhm.
I met them yesterday. Like, they
Yeah.
left such an imprint on me, and like I have a heart for so many of them. And still to this day, sometimes I wonder how that client is doing, like I
Yeah.
wish we could have that, but we
I know.
can't. And I mean, you can if they reach out, or if they find you, but they probably don't.
Yeah. And you can't seek it out, especially when it's the kids, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's always been like the hardest thing is some of the jobs I've left, like especially with community mental health, I saw a lot of young kids. And I just remember, I think I cried with them when I told them I was leaving because I felt so guilty and I knew that they
Oh,
really like needed that support and I knew they were going to get it from someone else, but like I felt bad. And so,
mhm.
well, every once in a while, especially now that I'm back in North Carolina, I'm like, gosh, I wonder like how they're doing. And it's been, I don't know, 9 years or something, 10 years. Like, it's like, gosh, I hope that they're okay. But yeah, and that's something that people don't really talk about in school, which is kind of like leads a little bit into my next question. But there's a lot of stuff that I think we're not prepared for as therapists, just with school alone.
Mhm.
So with grad school, like maybe what parts of it were very helpful for you? It sounds like therapy was like that,
Yeah.
them encouraging you guys to get your own personal therapy. But were there any other parts that you found really helpful or things that maybe your program was lacking?
I really feel like my grad school prepared me quite well.
Hmm.
I think a lot of my experience was because I applied it to myself. Like, to be honest, I was just not in a great space when I started grad school,
Hmm.
like mentally myself. So being able to grow and apply it as I was learning it, I think was super helpful. I still remember though, this one, like one of our in-seat programs, this professor, I cannot remember his name. I wish I could, because I would look him up. But so they would do role playing like on the
Oh, the
stage. I
worst.
hate role playing, by the way. Always hated
The
it.
worst. We're gonna get to how we talk about EMDR.
I know. Um, but
Oh,
so they would role play, and like this guy was like connection after connection. Like he instantly made connections, and I was just like,
wow.
oh my gosh, I want to be like him, you know, like
Yeah.
how does he do that? And I remember asking him like after class, like, how do you make connections like that? Like I sit here and I'm listening to someone, I get so lost in what they're talking about and I don't make the connection. And, you know, through my experience, I feel like I'm there now. Like I feel
Mhm.
like when I was watching him, I'm actually applying it myself.
Yeah.
And so I wish that they would have kind of explain to you that you don't really find like your sweet spot or your niche right away, and you're probably not going to feel very comfortable right away, you know, like it's okay to not feel comfortable, and it's okay to like move around from one modality to another, because
Mhm.
I remember them asking us all the time, like, you know, what modality do you feel like you kind of sway towards? And I was like, I don't know, like all of them, you know.
Yeah, whichever one works. What are we studying this week? Because that's the one I'm connected with. Like,
Right. Like,
yeah.
I'm just gonna make whatever work. But
Right.
I wish they would have kind of told you that. And what I found myself is like they kind of all work together. Like I
Mhm.
don't really focus on one and say, hey, this is all that I do. Because when I work with one client, like in one session, we might use person-centered, we might use
Yep.
psychoanalysis, we might use somatic therapy, we might use EMDR, like all in one session. So
Mhm.
like I think I was so focused on that of like trying to find like my one modality that would work, that I kind of like restricted myself.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
something that I wish, and they made me very scared of trauma, which trauma is like,
Mhm.
I work a lot with trauma, and it can be hard, it can be difficult, but they made me in grad school, I was like, I'm not working with trauma at all. And so I think that was also you know, it kind of held me back from where I needed to be, because
Mhm.
they just kind of placed that fear in me. But on the positive side, I'm very founded in my faith, and
Mhm.
I went to a Christian college, and so that also grew me not only mentally through the courses but also towards God. And so
Mhm.
I found like I am my closest with God through that program. And you know, they do, as a therapist, you have to be careful, like, you know, like
Yeah.
putting your Christian values or your spiritual values in a session with somebody, but they also kind of made that a little bit scary too. And I find that it's not as scary, because your clients will tell you. And as long as you are
Mhm.
working with where your clients are, you're fine. You know, if you have somebody who's a believer and you can share those beliefs, it's great. And if not, like you can meet them where they're at and it's
Yeah.
totally okay. I think they kind of like, and maybe it was just my perception, but I felt like I wasn't allowed to say I was a Christian counselor or that my faith was in God. So I very much don't do that now.
Yeah, it's like the self-disclosure thing, right? Like it kind
Yeah,
of gets bundled into that. But there's some
yeah,
people who specifically seek out therapists who are of the same faith as them or
right,
don't have faith if that's where they're at. Like, and sometimes that's what's going to attract somebody to you.
right. I
So
think
why not?
most of my clients now, like
Mhm.
actually the ones, there's a couple that I just got some new ones, and they were like, I specifically wanted you because you're a Christian counselor.
Mhm.
And so that, you know, that feels nice.
Yeah.
It feels good because I can put out who I am, and like
Mhm.
they're coming to me for that. And I've had the opposite too, you know, um I had a client I did a consultation with, and they were like, well, what are your political views? And I
Mm.
didn't tell them what my political views were. I was like, well, I don't really disclose that information because I want my clients to feel comfortable with, you know, I meet you where you are. Like
Yeah.
that's what I want to do. And they didn't like that answer. And so I don't know if they like searched me or like whatever they might have done to
Yeah.
find my political views, but I was like, that's not the intent of therapy. The intent of therapy is for me to meet you where you're at. So
Mhm.
you'll find the right people. If clients aren't a right fit, they're just not a right fit. That's another thing I kind of wish that grad school would have prepared us for, because
Right.
I can remember like my first few clients that like didn't show up again, or, just kind of ghosted me.
Right.
I was devastated by it. I was like,
Mhm.
what did I do wrong? And I'm just like, now I'm like, hey, if we're not a right fit, tell me and I'll help you find someone who is. I want you to get the best treatment possible. So that was something I think that they should. I don't know if you can prepare for that. I don't, you might just have to go through it, I guess.
Yeah, I think it might be both. I think it's like if somebody can warn you that that happens, then maybe it won't hurt so bad when it happens to you, because it will happen to everybody at some point. Like,
Yes.
and if they had just been like, hey, just so you know, like sometimes there's circumstances that like the person thought they were ready for therapy and they weren't. And they
Mm,
like stop reaching out to you, or they don't show up for their next appointment, or, kind of gave us like a couple examples. It still would sting when it happened, but there'd be a part of us to be like, that's what they were talking about. Okay, well,
right.
maybe they weren't ready. Maybe it's this, instead of our automatics being like, what did I do, when we're already facing that imposter syndrome and fear.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, probably would have been nice. So let the
Mhm.
baby therapists out here now know that that can happen and it is not your
And it
fault.
is okay. And it's not your fault, like
Yeah.
at
They
all.
they just may not be ready, or they may have decided like you're not it for them for whatever reason. And
Mhm.
like you said, whether it's, some people want, I don't know, they want somebody who looks like them or is from the same place as them or sounds like them. And I think with how everything's been these last few years, certain things like religion or location or any of that sometimes matters more. So for that person that you're describing, like their politics may be like really important to them, whichever
Right.
way that they went, and so they needed to know that. And because you didn't disclose, which is totally your right to not do that, um they just were like, okay, no, like I want somebody who's like an advocate on this end or that end.
Right.
So
Exactly.
cool, then go find that, because someone will be. So
Right.
but yeah, I wish that they told us like there's somebody for everybody. They tell you that with dating, right? There's somebody for everyone. But like that's the same for therapists too. So
Yeah.
I
We
just don't
need to
want to.
repeat that. We need to keep repeating that to new therapists, because that's probably one of the hardest things about becoming a new therapist is like you really blame yourself when someone
Yeah.
doesn't show back up. But I mean, I've been through plenty of therapists myself, like
Mhm.
I meet with them and I'm like, yeah, we're just not going to click, or I don't feel comfortable. And I don't want my client to not feel comfortable.
Right.
So please tell me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that with friends. It's like that with any relationships, right? And like the
Right.
therapy relationship is a relationship.
Right.
So I know I've met people and been like, I mean, they're okay, but like I really don't want to talk to, like, at work, right? Like they're cool to like talk to you at work, but like I don't want to hang out with them on Saturday.
Right.
So
Exactly.
nothing against them. It's just not, I don't see us doing that. And so it can be like that in any relationship. And yeah, I think that's a really good point that gets kind of either glossed over or not really addressed in grad school.
Hmm.
So, well, I know you mentioned your first job in this field out of grad school was like in-home stuff. And then you said you transitioned to a group practice.
Hmm.
Okay. So tell me what that was like and what your experience was there.
So I actually kind of started that transition after I graduated grad school. The in-home place that I was working, I was like, this is just too much,
Mhm.
to continue to do in-home and be active duty. But I wanted to continue working. I didn't want to take a break. Obviously, I wouldn't even take a break when I had a kid. So
Right. What's going to stop you now?
right. So they worked with me when I did EMDR training, and that's where you and I met.
Yeah.
Yay. But they worked with me on using EMDR. So I worked in office, and we
Mhm.
had some of our in-home clients would come and see me in office. So it was kind of a weird dynamic. And at first I was like kind of hesitant to go into it, but
Mhm.
like they might have had a different in-home counselor. And then the other in-home counselor and I would work together and say whether or not we thought a client would be good for EMDR therapy.
Oh, okay.
And then I would do EMDR therapy with them while they were doing in-home therapy with them.
Okay.
And it really sped up the process. Like we saw a lot of kids, really working through a lot of their issues
Mhm.
um, through that dynamic. So I kind of started it then, but like still the place I was working at wasn't just, it just was kind of toxic a little bit.
Mhm.
So I found a place in my hometown, which was fabulous. It was right like 2 minutes from my house,
Wow.
that I could work in the group practice. And so I applied there. It took me forever to get in. I think I applied in like October, and then I finally got word that I got the job in March or April of the next year,
Wow.
which was actually right when COVID hit.
Mm.
So I had gotten the job right when COVID hit. But they still let me come on, and I still was doing in person. We just had to follow all the COVID
Mhm.
protocols. So I transitioned and started working there, and worked there for, I believe, two years. Oh my gosh, I don't know.
And that's where you were getting your hours to be fully licensed, right?
Yes. So
Mhm.
yeah, actually, it was kind of nice because the place that I worked, the in-home place in Virginia and the place in North Carolina that I worked. So we lived right on the state border of
Mhm.
North Carolina and Virginia. Um, I was able to bring my hours. I had half of my hours at the in-home place, and then I was able to bring them over to North Carolina.
Oh,
So
good.
they actually accepted the hours from Virginia. I had the same supervisor, so I don't know if that played a role. Like the supervisor that was there for in-home was licensed in both North Carolina and Virginia.
Mm.
And so I was able to transition into the North Carolina setting and finish up the second half of my hours. So I had about half and half from each place.
Nice.
So I finished my 3,000 hours right before we had to pick up and move again. But
Mm.
I continued on with the group practice even after moving, and just offered teletherapy for my
Nice.
clients. So that was really nice.
Yeah. And then to navigate all of that, getting your license, doing your hours, being still at that point Coast Guard, because you still are now. Right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
like, how?
I don't know. I don't know. I was averaging about 25 clients a week,
Whoa.
on top of, because I was really determined to get it done before moving from North Carolina, because I
Hmm.
didn't want, with transitioning from state to state when you're not
Yeah.
fully licensed, like it's really up to the board whether or not they'll accept your hours.
Hmm.
So I didn't want to have to possibly start all over again. And so I really was like, okay, I got to figure out how many hours do I need per week to get this done before we move. And we didn't know for sure we were moving. We just knew it was a possibility we would have to move. So yeah, I was averaging about 25 hours a week. The one great thing about my job at the Coast Guard at the time, I was able to do, I forget what they called it, regular day offs. So you would do, instead of like an 8-hour day, you would do like a 10-hour day, and then you would have a day off. I kind of changed it up a little bit because that was too much for me. Like a 10-hour day was too much. So I navigated it to where I would work longer days and then a half a day on
Hmm.
Wednesdays. And then the other half of that Wednesday, I did my clients. So I was
Okay.
doing like 8 clients in that half a day, which
Wow.
is a lot. And it was like back to back. Like, I don't recommend that for
No.
anyone.
8 in a day is a lot anyway, let alone you'd already worked half a day at your other
Right.
job.
Yeah. So yeah, it was definitely a lot. And I am very glad that I did it. But I would not do it again. And I would
Mhm.
not, unless you have to, like if you have a specific reason, kind of like what I had to do. I just wouldn't recommend anyone doing that. I really did burn myself out.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's okay. I learned a lot, I grew a lot. But I wouldn't do it again, and I
Mhm.
don't recommend it.
Yeah, that's a whole lot. And I could see why too at that point though, like your motivation was really high and knowing that it was going to be short term, it's like a little bit easier to manage, but it's also like you said, you don't want to get burned out too early in your career. You're like, I'm still getting my hours. I don't want to be burned out before I'm like even fully licensed.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it sounds like you did the best you can. And you were talking about earlier about self-care. So it sounds like maybe
Yeah.
you knew some things to do to take care of yourself during that time.
Yeah, I think I knew them. I probably just wasn't doing that.
When did you have time?
I know. I did learn, like, I think sometimes like I would get very overwhelmed, and
Mhm.
then it was like I would see a client and it would like ground me or would like reset me, which is I still to this day, I experience that, and I don't know why or
Mhm.
how that is. I mean, I think it's a blessing. It's very wonderful, but at the same time, I'm like, should I really be going into a session when I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed? But then in the first 5 minutes, it's like, like I get to take a
Something
breath.
clicks. Mhm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I did my best, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, again, knowing it was short term, and maybe for you, it was like, if I can do this on the front end, I'll relax on the back end.
Yes, and that was very much like I knew that wasn't sustainable long term, and like I
Mhm.
knew I was just doing it for a reason.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it's kind of like if you're trying to meet a financial goal and you want to work, hey, I'm going to work this many hours until I reach that goal, and then I'm
Yep.
going to drop back. But dropping back was also very challenging too, because you got to let clients go, and that
Mhm.
was hard. Thankfully, that transition was right when I was moving. And so I was able to, not everyone wanted to come telehealth.
Mhm.
So I was able to give them the choice. And it just worked out perfectly that some people were like, yeah, I want to, continue via telehealth. And other people were like, no, I want to be in person. So I would refer them to someone at the practice in person. But my numbers worked out perfectly. So I
Yeah.
dropped back enough and it was sustainable, and it was, I took like a month and a half off, I think. Um, and kind of just got my bearings and then started back
Mhm.
up again. So
That was smart too. That there's the self-care right there.
yeah, yeah. I was like, I just have to meet this finish line and then I can
Mhm.
kind of relax. Yeah.
And even that, like, unpack box, like, maybe do more of your personal life stuff that you needed
Yeah.
to before you just jumped right back in to the work
Hmm.
stuff too. It's smart.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about starting your own practice. Like, what inspired that? Who do you see?
Yeah. So I kind of started, I wanted to really do like EMDR intensives
Mhm.
as my private practice. And that's kind of where I started to get the ball rolling, is because it's so effective. But unfortunately, it's just, I don't know. There are people that do it and they do it very well. Um, I just might not be in the right space at the right time, kind of thing for that. So I started wanting to go into EMDR intensives where I would just work intensive care, like 1 to 2 days back to back with an EMDR client. I've had a couple clients that have done the intensives, but most of my clients, what I learned was most of them want routine, regular therapy, even if it's EMDR. So
Mhm.
that was kind of what got me, like, pushing me towards starting my own practice. And then, unfortunately, the place I was working at was fabulous. I loved them. I loved everyone there, but they also transitioned to, I was a 1099 and they transitioned to W-2.
Okay.
Um, and like, I kind of felt like I didn't really need to be a W-2 employee just because the Coast Guard, I have medical,
Yeah.
I have a retirement. Like, it wasn't really beneficial for me to transition into a W-2 employee. So on top of my own desire to start my own private practice and to go into intensives and then them switching to W-2, I was like, I kind of think that this is the right time.
Mhm.
I was also going through a lot of health issues at the time.
Mhm.
And I had an appointment set up to see a surgeon in a different state during that summer. And I didn't really know like what was going to happen after that. So I felt like they kind of all fell into place for me to say, hey, I'm going to take a break. I'm probably going to start my own private practice. I was very upfront and, I wanted to be transparent with the group practice that I was with, that I wanted to start my own private practice. Just because they were so great to me. I loved
Mhm.
them, they were fabulous. It was a great place to work. But I I thought like everything was kind of falling into place. And then with the possible surgery coming up, I didn't know how long I would be out. I didn't want my clients to have to wait on me. So
Mhm.
I just kind of gave my resignation and said, hey, I've got health issues coming up and I'm probably going to start my own private practice. So I ended my employment there and kind of did the background work to start my own private practice, but didn't hit the go button because I didn't know what was going to happen with my
Yeah.
health. And then I went out for my health and things went great, very well. And I was back before I even thought I was going to be back. I did give myself about a month and a half. actually probably longer than that, maybe 2 months, 2.5 months before hitting the go button on my private practice. So I think I started in August or September of last year with my private practice. And it was amazing. Like right away, I had a full caseload, and I say full caseload, but like I only have about 6 to 8 clients a week.
Nice.
So it's great. It's full caseload for me because I'm
Yeah.
still active duty. I'm still working full time. So, you know, one, and some of them are every other week. So like there might be one week where I only have like four clients, and then the next week I have 8. So, it worked out. It just worked out perfectly. I was very nervous to go private practice,
Mhm.
myself. So, but I don't know. It felt, I was making it much harder than it was.
Well, that's one of those other things that they don't really talk about a lot in grad school either.
Uh,
So,
yeah,
or
I
at
wish
all.
they did. They need to have
Yeah.
like a course, a private practice course.
Yeah, they really do, at
Mhm.
least like an elective. So if you know at some point you're interested in that, you could take it, you know,
Right,
because otherwise it's like you said, there's so many unknowns and it gets very scary. And then that imposter syndrome hits all over again because even though we've been in the career for a little bit, it's a different aspect of it. And then it's business stuff,
right,
business entities and structures and taxes and like all these things that are intimidating to everybody anyway, let alone like us having to now take care of it ourselves. So
right. Yeah.
it's a lot, but the trade-off is really good. So
Yes. It's so good.
yeah.
Yeah. I feel great, like being able to work, you know, for myself and by myself.
Mhm.
And again, the Coast Guard, I have like I don't know, maybe like 12 people, 8 to 12 people that, you know, I supervise. And it's so nice to just not like it's
Mhm.
I only have to
Yeah.
worry about myself. So
Right.
like as long as I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, like there's no drama, no, you know, no nothing.
Nope.
You know, the only stress you kind of get is like, am I paying enough quarterly taxes, or am I,
Mhm.
you know, am I, or is all my paperwork like up to regulation or up to date, you know? Other than
Yeah,
that, it's super easy.
definitely, yeah, and accounting's the only thing I outsourced because I was
Yeah,
like, "I don't wanna mess with that." So everything else I did myself, but the money part, I was like, "No, that is very intimidating, so I'll pay somebody to do it." Like, that's
right.
so there's even, like, more options with that, that you can do on
Exactly.
your own.
Yeah. And there's so many like Facebook groups out there to like
Oh,
help
yeah.
you if you want to start a private practice, or if you want to learn about the accounting, or even learning about credentialing with insurance. Like you can find a Facebook group for everything.
Yep.
And you can hire anyone. Like if you have the money, you can hire anyone to do it for you. I'm just cheap, and I, I don't.
Yeah, that was me. I was like, how do you make a website?" Like, and figuring it out. So I was like, and also some of the things for me at least, I was like, I want to know how to change it. I don't want to rely on somebody to have to be like, oh, I changed my rates or oh, I changed my hours. Let me pay
Yes.
this person however much for 2 minutes of their time, but they
Right.
charge me for an hour to like edit my website. So like it is helpful to know how to do most things yourself.
Right. Right.
But
And I just don't like waiting on other people's. I think that's a little bit of a control thing on my end, but
I'm not
um
familiar with that
yeah,
personally at all. As I say, I literally do everything myself.
I know. But yeah, like uh, it's much easier than I anticipated it being, and it's
Yeah,
not as scary. And I think my biggest worry, and I can't imagine what it would be like if I didn't have the Coast Guard to fall back on, because that's my main source of income.
right.
So that, you know, my private practice is just extra, it's just incentive.
Mhm,
Um, if I didn't have that, I think it would have been a lot more scary, because I have something to fall back on. And if I don't get a full client, a full caseload right away, it's okay.
mhm,
Um, and so I think the fear is very valid, but at the
mhm.
same time, if there's somebody out there that's like wanting to do it, or just like the fear is kind of holding them back, when you put your foot in, it just happens. You don't have to really worry too much. There's so
Mhm.
many potential clients out there. You're going to get them.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you're right. Like there's a lot of planning that goes into it. And for you, you took your time to make sure that you were in the right space physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever, to be able to launch your practice. And
Hmm.
you did take your time with it and you took time off to be able to really get to that space to do it. And I think that that scares people sometimes, like that there's stuff that they may have to sacrifice, but it's like thinking of the payoff. It's like you were talking about with the hours, right? Like what stuff do you have to do on the front end that it might be more exhausting to, I don't know, like I would see like 7 clients in a day and then spend some time looking up how to make a website, looking up like how to create a PLLC, like things like that. But
Mhm.
it works out now when everything's automated and just kind of running on its own.
Right.
So I think it's, people can take the time, and it will take time, but like you said, once you get it, you get it. And then you're good. So it's worth it.
Exactly.
But well, I already know the answer to this next question, but I'm asking it anyway for everybody else, which would be, what trainings have you had as a therapist that have changed the direction of your practice, how you work, and your clients' lives?
Yeah, definitely EMDR.
Mhm.
And so that's where you and I met, and
Yeah.
it changed me. I think we did it together. Like,
I was your therapist in like
yeah,
role
you were my
play.
therapist, and I I mean, that was like the first time I learned I had ADHD. Like, my
Right.
entire childhood, I was just like thinking that I wasn't as smart, or like I was
Yeah.
like something wasn't clicking, and it was me. We did like a timed times test, and I don't remember, I think it was like second grade. And see, now the memory is like faded because it's not as important to me. But
Mhm.
I remember I cheated on the test, and it wasn't because I didn't know how to do it. It was just
Mhm.
because like my brain just didn't click in certain ways. And when we did the EMDR, what I realized is that I had severe ADHD.
Mhm.
And then I was like, wow, now everything makes so much more sense. It makes sense why everything was always so hard for me.
Yeah.
And still to this day, I try to make things harder for myself than what they really are. And I
Mhm.
think that's because that's how I had to learn how to get through school. Was everything was so much harder for me than it was for anyone else, because my brain just wouldn't work that way. And
Mhm.
I still catch myself very often. I'll be like, why am I making this is easy? It's like nothing can ever be easy.
Mhm.
But like it is, and I'm just trying to make it harder. So yeah, so we trained in EMDR with you.
Yeah.
And that completely transformed my my practice and the way that I practice. Actually, the girl I was talking about earlier in college that her and I connected,
Mhm.
that we both had kids at the same time, she had called me one day and said, hey, I think you should take training in EMDR. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't really know if I trust it or believe in it. Like, how could something be that easy? There we go again, with the
Mhm.
whole easy thing.
Yeah.
Um, and, but I trusted her. I read about it and I was like, yeah, it seems interesting. I'll go ahead and put my foot in the door. And it was great because we had the trainer right in Virginia Beach with us. So I didn't have to travel to go to do the training.
Right.
Um,
It was over a
and
weekend, 2 weekends.
yeah, two
Mhm.
weekends. Yeah. And so, we did that, and truly, um, it just, it made everything click for me. It was like, wow, this is how it is to be a therapist. And what I was talking about earlier with like the different modalities, and like how I was so hyper focused on getting one modality,
Mhm.
EMDR really helped me as a therapist learn to connect those things. Because you'll hear somebody when they're processing something and you're like, that means this. But
Mhm.
as a therapist, you can't tell that, you can't be like, hey, that means this, like
Right.
flat out, right? Like they have to come to it on their own. But just having that idea and being able to kind of guide them on that path, EMDR did that for me. It made it click for me. So not only am I a better therapist when I use EMDR, but I'm also a better therapist when I am just using a different modality. So yeah, EMDR is like my biggest and like most used modality. And then
Yeah.
I kind of have transitioned into some internal family systems as well.
Oh,
And
cool.
so what I've learned is internal family systems is kind of in part like it's kind of um sorry, the internal family systems and parts work kind of mean the same thing,
Yeah.
but it kind of naturally takes place in the EMDR process.
Mm.
And so a lot of times what what I do, some clients it works for and some it doesn't, but you have to do that with all of your clients, learn what works for them and what doesn't. But I'll have them visit their younger selves or different parts of themselves through the EMDR process. And it just kind of kickstarts that healing, that, reparenting and just giving that child what they need through EMDR. So I don't know, it works well. They work super well together. And I find that to be a pretty big chunk of my practice. And then I've not been trained in it, but I use a lot of somatic therapy as well. And I think when you use somatic therapy with other modalities, it clicks better with clientele. I've had a lot of clients say, like when they're doing something or when they experience something, because we talk a lot about the body sensations that are happening, they'll kind of be like, I heard your voice in the back of my head telling me what I should and shouldn't do, or like what direction to kind of take, or like, hey, this is an alarm, like that something is wrong. My body is telling me something is wrong. And the only reason I think that happens is because we do input or utilize the body into the therapy practice. I don't think if we were just talking about it, that it would kind of click, like they would remember those phrases or the things that we talked about. So I think how somatic therapy helps is, it helps somebody know that what happened to them is stored in their body, but it also helps them to recognize when they can take action on something and they can apply it outside of the therapy session, which is what you want them to do. Like you don't want them to only practice what you're doing in session, because then it's going to be very slow progress.
Oh, for sure. It's like practicing a language, right? Like if you're only practicing Spanish in your Spanish class, like however many, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever your class is a week, you're not going to know how to speak the language. You're just going to like take for the test. So it's like the people who come in, for like whatever, for a session, and they're like, yeah, I totally been practicing. We can tell. Like we can always tell. So I know you were practicing Spanish in between. Like I know you were practicing, like, you kind of binged before, or whatever, right before the session, like something's up. But I think what's interesting, what you said that I think is really important too, is a lot of clients, it's kind of like you were saying about yourself, like they don't always trust their gut instincts, or they've learned over time to rationalize everything. And even though there is some great stuff with that CBT and stuff along those lines, if they're not paying attention to the gut instincts, they're not trusting themselves. They're being told the opposite of that. Instead of trust your instinct, it's nope, sometimes it's wrong, like process it through your brain and this frontal part. And that's not always the best either. Or maybe it's a combination of the two that works the best, but they're only getting half the message. So I love that you bring that up and kind of put them in their body, because how many people dissociate on the daily? Like you need to bring them back into their body. So maybe then they can get to the core of what's actually going on.
Yeah. And some people it's very hard. And especially with the military population, they've learned to ignore their body sensations. So like if I have one session with a military person and I'm like, hey, what does that feel like in your body? And they're like, what
are you talking about?
It doesn't feel like anything. I don't feel anything in my body.
Like I'm kind of hungry.
But what's so interesting is like, after you say that, it's almost like you see it. They're like,
yep,
there was something going on in my body, and like it just kind of connects, and then they start paying attention to it, and then like 3 sessions later they'll be like, hey, you know what, I noticed my heart rate was increasing, or I noticed my stomach was tightening up, and you're like, aha, you noticed your body.
Yeah, it's working. So, oh, I love that though, because like you said, especially military, you're almost like programmed to ignore all of that, just like follow whatever the orders are, the instructions or whatever else. And I think sometimes that dysregulates them more when something's going on that's emotional or physical, because they don't have the tools. They're not learning that at work.
You're learning just to ignore it and just take all emotion out and just do what you're told, and that's it. And it's like, oh my God, no. Like, yes, that's great to get the mission done, but no.
Yeah, not like all the time, every day. Like that doesn't work. That's not sustainable either.
Right.
But yeah, it's funny talking about EMDR with you, because I remember us both being like in the first role play, being like, I don't know what this is. We got our books out. We're like, are we doing this right? And I remember I was the first client, and then the guy who was in our little triad thing did it. And I was like, why am I crying? Like, I don't have conscious like memories popping up. I'm just crying. And I was first and I was like, please don't let me be the only one. Cause we all just met. And then everybody cried. And I was like feeling
Yeah.
really good about that. I was like, okay, good. It's not just me. But I
It's
remember,
so strong.
yeah, it was scary, but it was like really intense in like a good way where I was like, this is working. I'm glad I paid for this. I know I'm crying in front of strangers, but like something's working here.
Mhm.
But I do remember you seemed like you connected really well with that modality. Like
Oh,
not
thank you.
yeah, like I remember being on the therapist side and I was so scared to be the one like trying to do it. And you connected really well with me. I feel like we both were like, all right, we're just going to jump in and hope that this works. And you let yourself connect to it, which I think is very difficult to do in those situations as like you're picking which trainings to do and trying to figure out what modality may help you. You hit on it a little bit earlier of like you need to have a personal connection. You need to feel like you have faith in this modality. You need to feel like it works because if you don't, how are you going to sell clients on it? How are you going to help them try to
Mhm.
like be open to experiencing it? And I feel like you did really well in helping me as the therapist be like, okay, like she's in it with me. So like, let's go. And then I just felt like you connected a lot. I remember I was processing it after. And then the second weekend too, being like, what are you thinking about it so far? Like, how's it feeling? And I think it was just really helpful. It was almost like I could see the light bulb go off for you and it was helpful to like process it with you. But I felt like you felt like a pull to it in a
Yeah.
way that is not always the case for a lot of people in those experiences.
Right. Like I struggled, like even in grad school and then in home before I knew EMDR with, I really felt like I was pulling towards cognitive behavioral therapy. Like I
Mhm.
really felt like that was it for
Yeah.
me. And probably because I had to tell myself that, like all the good positive things that I could try to think of as a kid. But I always struggled with it. And I'm like, why doesn't it feel like I connect? You know, like
Mhm.
why does this feel like there's so much resistance towards cognitive behavioral therapy? And now I hate cognitive behavioral. I despise it, but not so I despise it on its own. I don't
Mhm.
despise it, you know, in with working with other modalities, but on its own, I just don't feel like you're hitting it. I feel like it's very surfacey and I feel like you
Mhm.
have to get deeper.
Yeah, it's not the
Um,
whole picture. It's like you were saying with the
yeah,
body, right? If you're just focused on what are you rationally thinking, you're ignoring this entire other half of their brain, their body, everything.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think that that makes sense. But that's one of the most popular ones, right? So that's what you talk about in school. Like, did your program talk about EMDR at all?
No, not at
Yeah.
all.
I only learned about like the few theories from like 100 years ago. Like, let's talk about Freud and let's talk about like it was just like,
Analysis and yeah,
yeah. So not a
experiential therapy, which I like experiential
mhm.
therapy. Yeah,
Yeah, but like somatic, don't remember ever
no,
hearing about that in school.
mm-mm,
So
no.
I guess that's another thing too, whether like you were saying with your friend introducing you, are you seeking out things that maybe felt like they fit better? That's sometimes what you have to do because we're not given all of the education. And you kind of, or at least I did, I guess, go into grad school thinking like, I'm going to come out and know exactly how to be a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
No,
No,
not even
you
close.
cannot be any further from the truth.
No. So then I'm like, wait, I have to still keep learning and training and like doing all these things. Like I don't actually have the skills. I have the foundation. That's it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I think you've done a good job, it sounds like, of trying to find the modalities that maybe you weren't provided with, but you've sought them out on your own and figured out what you connect with, which then I think is going to help you connect better with your clients, especially when you've got like a whole bag to pull from and be like, let me try a little of this. And okay, you're in this headspace today. Let's try a little of that. And I think that that's
Right.
smart instead of just, I'm a CBT therapist and that's it.
Right. Right. And there are so many times when a client, like I have, you know, I have certain EMDR clients and then
Mhm.
certain clients that are, you know, something different. But I'll have an EMDR client come in and just kind of be like, yeah, I'm not really feeling like EMDR today or whatever. And so like sometimes they'll come in so dysregulated and I'm like, okay, today all we're going to do is resourcing. We're not
Mhm.
doing any processing, we're not doing anything different, you know, so you have to know all those different things. But I guess my suggestion would be like, if you're really trying to find the right one and feeling like none of them are like really clicking for you, keep searching. Go outside of
Mhm.
your like your box and, you know, look outside the box, look into different therapy groups, do more research on things you might not have learned about, obviously all evidence-based treatments, but, really outsource yourself, because there'll be one that you feel like clicks, and then it's almost like all of the other modalities fall into place.
Oh yeah. Then you can pick like your favorite parts from the other ones instead of
Right.
having to feel like you have to take the entire thing.
Right.
So,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, it's very good advice. And that goes into my last question, which is, what do you wish you knew earlier in your career? I know you've kind of dropped a few things here and there throughout the episode,
Yeah.
but if there's
Um,
anything in particular that you think would have been helpful to know sooner.
hmm. I wish I would have known how important it was to be healthy myself,
Hmm.
before moving in with other clients. And then I guess also like, so I feel like when you're not in a healthy kind of mindset, you kind of, I've met therapists like this, it's kind of scary, but
Mhm.
they'll be like, oh yeah, I've been through that and this is what I did. And and I think there's a little part of that that's helpful for
Mhm.
everybody, right? But that's not what we're there for, because
Yeah.
we have to work with them and where they're at. And it's nice to share with them because it makes them feel like less isolated if it's
Mhm.
beneficial for them. But at the same time, this isn't like a compare and contrast, or like, hey, this worked for me, it will work for you kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think when you're not as healthy yourself, you kind of gravitate towards that, and you're kind of seeking, not intentionally, maybe subconsciously, you're kind of seeking validation through your clients.
Mhm.
And you can't be as an effective therapist, as effective of a therapist, if you're in that space.
Yeah, it's like
So,
group therapy now.
right,
Like you
yeah,
both are the clients suddenly.
right. Yeah. So I think knowing how important it is to kind of be in your own good mental space,
Mhm.
before treating or working with other people. Um, I also think this is kind of like a downside to it, and maybe it's just me because I don't know, maybe I can't turn it off completely, but I think you get a different perception of just life in general. And
Mhm.
like so this is funny. I watched Fight Club for the first time since becoming a therapist the other day.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, when I watch that movie as a therapist now, I view that movie completely differently than I did
Mhm.
before I was a therapist. And I
Mhm.
think your mind just learns to connect things. And it's not that, you're judging or you're trying to diagnose every person that you meet. That's not the case. Like I can turn that part off, right? But
Mhm.
like you just kind of have this shift in mindset that's like, well, why do you think they're doing that? Or like you can notice when somebody's unhealthy. And the hardest part is like as a friend or as a family member,
Mhm.
not being able to help them get where they might or could be.
Mhm.
You just kind of have to sit back and watch. And I think that's very, very difficult when you see someone struggling and you're a therapist and because now you're mentally healthy, how life can be and what they could achieve. And you can't make that happen. And it's the
Yeah.
same for clients too. When you meet a client, like you can't force their
Mhm.
progress. They have to do that progress on their own. They have to learn it on their own. And
Yeah.
I think that can be really hard.
It is, especially when you're newer and you want to like fix them, you want things to get better for them. You want to like push them forward on that journey or like lead them on the journey,
Yes.
and that's something I think that wasn't addressed enough either, was like sometimes you have to sit back and let them come to you, not only like for the first session, but they may be sitting there and that may be the only work that they're willing to do is show up.
Right.
They're not willing to do the work in between, and you can't work harder than they are.
Right. And
So,
that's a very good point. That's something that I wished. I think that is significant with working with children too. And it's
mhm,
not necessarily sometimes the children, but sometimes the parents that are coming in.
almost
And
always.
yeah, and they, want their child to be in a certain place or do a
Yeah.
certain thing or be this certain kid, and you can't. Like they're their
Mhm.
own kid. You have to support where they're at. And I think that's why working with kids is so difficult, because there are many parents out there that are just not, they're not accepting of that
Mhm.
you know, they want to force something on their child, or they're forcing them into therapy, and we're not going to make progress if they don't want to be there.
No, not at all. And so then it becomes an effective relationship if the
Mm-hmm.
client, the kid, whoever it is, doesn't want to work. So, or they don't see the issues.
Right.
So, yeah. And then it does become tough when other people have different expectations, or even sometimes clients come in with expectations of like, oh, I'll do this for a few sessions and I'll be good.
Mm-hmm.
So, nobody taught me in school how to manage client expectations of therapy. No one ever talked about that. So, I think we all just have like very high standards for where we should be. And I think sometimes that we're a lot harder on ourselves in the beginning of our careers and take things so much more personal, like you were saying with ghosting or with some other stuff that comes up. So maybe, like you said, making sure that you're healthy in all the aspects before you jump into helping other people and taking on a lot of their stuff, because it can
Mm-hmm.
really affect people. I know some of the most difficult people I've ever met have been other therapists who didn't
Yes.
work on themselves, so,
Right.
or aren't continuously working on themselves.
Right. Definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, I think you offered a lot of good tips for new therapists today, because there's so much that isn't covered. And I think that, obviously that's the point of my whole channel is like, let me teach you what they didn't teach you in grad school and help other
Right.
people teach them. So maybe they won't have as tough of a road as we have had. So
Right. Yeah, I appreciate you doing this. I think it's so great. I hope so many, I wish they would just like broadcast this to all the grad students, because
that's
I'm
the hope.
sure there's going to be a lot of helpful information from therapists that have been through it. We need to know that stuff.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a fan of gatekeeping. I will tell people, like, here's the numbers if you want to know how much I made at this job. Like, here's the
Right.
things that people don't like to talk about. But guess what? Now, the more we gatekeep, the more people can get taken advantage of.
Right.
So I think there's a lot that we need to be transparent about to help the next population, because we're going to grow in other areas. We're not going to see as many clients as we get further in our careers, or maybe other ways we're expanding. And there's going to be new therapists that are taking on all the clients. So we need to make
Hmm.
sure they're good too, so they could take the.
Right.
But
Exactly.
well, thank you so much for being a guest on
Yeah.
this show
Thank you for
today.
having me. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Yeah. I was like, gosh, her experience is so good. Like, people need to hear about it.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
but I'm going to link all of your stuff under the video. So if you guys want to follow Stacy's Instagram, if you want to check out her website, everything will be down below. But thank you again for being a guest.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So subscribe below, follow along, and see you guys next episode.